Hey everybody, it's Kathy here. Lovely to see you today. Welcome back to the Inspired Connections podcast show. I've got Robert Schwartz, who is the author of My Soul's Gift, My Soul's Plan, in front of me. Robert, tell everybody about yourself.
Yeah, well, it's good to be back here with you. We've had some interesting conversations with the past, and always happy to come back. So I'm the author of 3 books. The premise of all 3 is that we plan our lives, including our biggest challenges, before we're born. The books are Your Soul's Plan, Your Soul's Gift, and Your Soul's Love. Your Soul's Love is specifically about the pre-birth planning of challenges in romantic relationships. Your Soul's Plan and Your Soul's Gift are about pretty much every other challenge we have in the Earth School. And I'm a hypnotist. I specialize in something called a between lives soul regression. It's a long session, about 2 hours, and it takes you to what is called your council of elders. These are the very wise, loving, highly evolved beings who oversee your personal evolution. And when you get in front of your council, you can ask literally any question on any subject, and if it's for your highest good, receive an answer. But people come wanting to know about their pre-birth plan. So they'll usually ask questions like, what did I plan? Why did I make those plans? How am I doing in terms of fulfilling my plans? And how can I better fulfill my plans? So in a nutshell, that's what I do. And for those who want more information, the website is yoursoulsplan.com. I'm working on a 4th book now about the pre-birth planning of challenges before we come into body. I'm not sure exactly what the topics will be that I'll cover in that book, but whatever I didn't cover in the first 3, it'll be in the 4th book. And my wife, Liesl, is a channel. She channels a group consciousness, a collective that we call the Beings of Light. And she and I co-teach a number of workshops, including a group between live soul regression. So you can do that either in a private session or in a group. It works just as well either way, and get to talk to your council of elders. People usually want to know, how did I come to do such unusual work that's so far out of the mainstream? I actually was, believe it or not, in the mainstream for the first 40 years of my life, doing corporate work, corporate marketing, corporate communications. And I didn't like this at all. And at the age of 40, I realized I just couldn't go on. I just couldn't do it anymore. And I knew that I had come to Earth to do something else, but I didn't know what it was, and I didn't even know how to figure out what it was. And then basically, Spirit staged an intervention, and a number of profound things happened within just a few weeks of each other. I had my first session ever with a medium, and she channeled my guides who told me that I had planned my life, and that was a mind-blowing experience in its own right. And then I met a woman who channels her soul, and her soul told me all about how pre-birth planning works. And then I had a spiritually transformative experience in which I was doing nothing more than walking down the street in the middle of the afternoon. And I had this experience in which I felt just pure, overwhelming, divine, unconditional love for every person I saw. And the combination of those 3 things got me to say, okay, going to leave the corporate world. And because of the session with the medium and the other woman's channeling of her higher self, I decided when I leave the corporate world, I will write a book about how we plan our challenges before we incarnate. Spent the next 3 years doing that. Then Your Soul's Plan came out, and then it led to a much more fulfilling life, in which I really feel like I'm making a difference in the world, which I never felt when I was in the corporate world.
Oh, you do, Robert, as well. I've run many support groups. I've heard of you first through those support groups. And the majority of people in that community tell me what a difference that your book has made to their life, or how it helped them sleep through the night, or made them less anxious, gave them a lot of comfort, gave them answers to questions that they couldn't get closure on. So I would highly recommend to anybody listening to read them if you want to understand the higher concepts of life. Your books are phenomenal. They're really good, Robert. I've also joined you on one of your workshops, and I loved it. And it's lovely to see Liesl as well, because you can hear her channeling, and it's just incredible. It's just very beautiful group of like-minded people in a very loving environment, and you always lead it really, really well. Robert, in terms of, you had these inspired stories, and did you just get a calling to go see the medium? What was the inspired connection? Did you just feel this pull or longing? Because so many people say to me, how do I know what my life purpose is? And it sounds to me like you're saying, I didn't. I just felt this pull or drawn or inspired to do something, and I did it. Is that right?
Well, no disrespect to mediums or mediumship, but that wasn't the first thing I tried. Remember, I come from a very mainstream background. So when I was having this existential crisis, and that's really what it was, my first attempts to resolve it were very conventional in nature. First thing I did, I just went to all my family and friends and I said, I'm really unhappy doing this corporate work. I know that I'm supposed to do something else, but I don't know what it is or how to figure out what it is. what do you think I should do with my life? And that, it turns out, is a really bad question to ask another person because they have no way of knowing. And they're just going to tell you whatever has made them happy, if in fact anything has made them happy. So that led nowhere. And then I went for career counseling and I took that Myers-Briggs inventory, which is really a wonderful tool. And it yielded some important insights, but it didn't tell me what to do with my life. And then I thought, okay, I've got to think outside the box here. What can I do to figure out my soul's plan, so to speak? And this idea came to me, go see a medium. I had never done that before. I wasn't even sure if I believed in mediumship, but I thought, why not? Let's give it a try. And that from the moment the session started, right away, the medium said to me, your spirit guides are here. And I said, what is a spirit guide? I mean, I'd never even heard the term before. So she had to explain that to me. And then she said, your guides want to talk directly with you. She started to channel them. And the first thing they said was, you planned your life, including your biggest challenges, before you were born. I just shook my head and I said, why in the world would I have done that? And then they said, well, you did this for purposes of spiritual growth. And then it got really interesting because they launched into this monologue in which they went through my challenges one by one and told me why I had planned them. Now, I hadn't told the medium anything about myself. I didn't tell the guides anything about myself during the session, yet they knew literally everything about me. And that just blew my whole world wide open.
Wow. Actually, that was one of the questions that one of my group in Be Making Connections Possible asked if I would ask you. She said, why, when we come from the state of blissful oneness that everybody speaks about, would we ever come and plan life challenges on Earth? Why would we want to go through the pain, Robert? What was when this woman sat there telling you this is exactly what you've done, what were you thinking?
Well, there are a number of answers to that question. One is that this state of perceived separation that we're in, which, by the way, is an illusion. You can't actually separate from the one. But what you can do is create an illusion in which you seem to be separate from the one. This state of perceived separation is really an experiment. So we got together, and by we, I mean the billions of souls who are on Earth right now, and we said we would like to make a unique contribution to the Godhead. What can we do that has never been done before? And a lot of ideas were kicked around, one of which was, what would it be like to separate seemingly and become a seemingly separate person? Now, at the time we came up with that idea, I'm not sure that we had full comprehension of what we were getting ourselves into. So as I understand it, there was a lot of debate back and forth between us and those who love and guide us, who are more highly evolved than we. And they advised us not to do this. They said, we foresee a lot of suffering. We do not recommend that you do this. And we considered that advice and then essentially said, noted, but we've got this and we want to do it. And then we did it. And then when we came into this seeming separation in which we appear to be confined to a physical body, there was such an initial feeling of overwhelm, fear, terror in some instances, because we had never experienced separation from the one before. So the experiment has continued, for eons of time now. And I think we're in what people sometimes call the in-breath of God. We're moving away from the perceived separation and returning to a state of unity consciousness. Now, I can answer that question also on another level, which is there are a number of really important differences between your perception of Earth challenges from the non-physical when you plan a life versus when you're here in a body. One of the big differences is that when you plan your life challenges before you incarnate, you know that a lifetime is actually very, very brief. Now, I know if you're suffering, it doesn't feel that way when you're here. But from the non-physical vantage point, you know that it's actually just a blink of an eye, basically. Also, from the non-physical vantage point, you know that nobody is permanently harmed by anything that happens here. And you also know that the wisdom that will come out of the challenges will become part of you literally for all eternity. So from that perspective, that a lifetime is very brief, nobody is permanently harmed by anything that happens here, and yet the wisdom becomes part of you for all eternity. From that perspective, it does make sense that some souls, not all, but some, would plan to come to Earth and would plan very difficult challenges.
Wow, that's incredible, Robert. Where are you now on that journey? You've covered so much ground. You've worked with so many people. I think you've also experienced many different mediums and metaphysical kind of beings and people that have come to you for spiritual advice and work as a result of your work in your books. Where are you now on your journey? What's your perception now? What do you hope to achieve in this final sort of section of life?
Well, my personal journey has changed quite a bit as of 3 years ago. About 3 years ago, I had my first ever non-dual experience. So for those who are not familiar with the term non-dual, it means not two, meaning that everything is one. Everything that exists is just part of one vibratory field of love and light. I had never studied non-duality before this experience happened, but I knew enough about it to recognize that it was a non-dual experience. And I'll just describe briefly what happened. I was sitting outside in a lawn chair in Florida during the winter. It's about 8:30 on a Thursday morning. I don't know why I remember that detail, but I do. And I was just watching the sunrise. And all of a sudden, there was this enormous rush of energy that came down from above. It entered my crown chakra, filled the physical body, filled the etheric bodies around the physical body. And I knew intuitively this was the energy of my higher self, my soul. This energy felt deeply, deeply powerful and deeply, deeply still. And those words don't even begin to describe the power or the stillness. This was an otherworldly power and an otherworldly stillness. And as this was happening, and it lasted about 3 hours, there were two knowings that were given to me. One is that all is well always, even though it may not appear to be. And the other is that I'm inviolable. I cannot be hurt by anything. Not only did this knowing come to me, but I actually experienced being inviolable. I just knew that this non-physical consciousness that I am cannot be harmed by anything or anyone in any way at any time. So again, this went on for about 3 hours. And when it was over, I ran to the computer, I typed in teachers of non-duality, put myself on the email list for everyone I could find, and there are a lot of them. And I started sifting through these teachings, and I basically put myself on a non-dual path. And since that time, I've studied with different non-dual teachers, and this is my path now. So in the non-dual path, what you're really bringing about is an awakening in which there's a shift in identity, a shift from identification with the personal self or the seemingly separate self, which is just an illusion anyway, and a return to your true identity, which is the I am, your higher self, your soul, the one, God, whatever term you'd like to use. The non-dual path, at least as I understand it, is bringing about a shift in identity from a false identity, the personality self, to your true, eternal, formless identity, which is the I am.
I understand it as well, that if you meditate on the I am, you start to self-realize. So we see here how inspired connections keep evolving you. You never really, because a lot of people say to me, what is my life purpose? What is my life purpose? And we could say in your instance, Robert, the life purpose for you is soul planning because you've done such a great body of work. But actually, now we see that spirit are leading you in a different direction and taking the work that you've got. It's not that you're letting go of it, but your soul's being drawn to look at the I am. It's looking at non-duality. It's started to move in that direction. And these inspired connections, they're just like little feelings or signs that come up on the way. And then you're very like me. As soon as something comes up, you go research it, you go check out the courses on it. I do the same thing. And I call that the inspired connection. If you spend a whole life waiting to learn about your life purpose, you're going to be waiting an awfully long time. And even if somebody tells you what it is, you still won't understand the vastness of that concept. You almost have to go through life being passionate about things or being excited about things or being driven or called towards something, and just trusting the process will always lead you where your soul needs to go, and your purpose will be born out of these little experiences. But if you do them with love and you do them with openness and you really enjoy the experience that you're having or try to put that energy towards it, out of that comes these incredible sort of concepts that end up being part of your work, and it's very fulfilling, isn't it? It's very incredible. I can't imagine you as anything other than the soul plan guru. I'm going to be honest. I have an experience that I'm going to tell everybody about that you probably don't know about, Robert. When I first met you, this is so interesting. I'd started working in America, and in the UK, not many people had talked about soul planning. And so when I started working with America, people kept asking me, oh, like, tell me about my soul plan, or tell me about soul plan life. And I'd had this idea that, there were maybe certain milestones in life that we were always going to get to. Didn't matter how we were going to get to them, but we were always going to be traveling to a certain location or time. But I'd never really explored soul planning. And I remember saying to people, I don't want to talk unauthentically about something that I don't have clarity or knowledge on. And I remember throwing out to Spirit, look, I really need some help. I need some help. I need somebody to teach me about soul planning. Like, can you send me facts? Because I don't want to talk about it until I've authentically understand it and I know your perception of what you want me to put forward. And from that moment onwards, crazy things started happening. People started coming for readings and they talk about all the signs and synchronicities to prove why their life was going to end the way that it was and things like that. And I started sort of being present to that. When I met you, Robert, and you probably don't know this, is I do something in trance where I do sound codes and bring down frequencies through spirit and sort of birth them to kind of change the atmosphere or heal. And sometimes I use it just to cleanse the energy of the house. And this day, I must have been doing this sounding in my house, just organically for myself, not for anybody else, just enjoying the blend of spirit and this feeling of dancing in the oneness through sound. And I must have been thinking about soul planning. I must be thinking about, I still haven't got to the concept, like, how am I going to, I need to really speak to Robert Schwartz. I really need to understand like what Robert thinks on this. And at that stage, I hadn't known you, wasn't aware that you, we had friends in common or anything like that. And I remember coming out of this trance and the sound, and I remember Spirit say, go to your computer, Kat. Go look at your computer and go to your emails. And I went to my emails, and there was an email from Robert Schwartz. I was just like, oh, like, almost like that sound wave. I think we had this conversation about when you get on the same frequency with somebody, that frequency draws, the light for light frequency draws that concept in. And I realized that's when I realized that sound as a manifesting frequency, when we take ourselves to this higher frequency, how powerful that can be. And I've only ever used it once or twice since then because it kind of made me a bit nervous because I didn't know the cause and effect of it. But I just found that was a really interesting sort of way of how an inspired connection itself, or just actually an intention, had drawn our connection seemingly together. And I've interviewed you a number of times, and we've talked about many different subjects. One of the key ones that always comes up and people really like your viewpoint on is when somebody passes in a tragic way, either through suicide or murder, Robert. And I know it's a really controversial subject, but people say to me, would my child have planned that? Would my daughter have planned that? Would my son have planned that? Why would they plan that kind of exit? Like, are they okay? And so I think you come from it as the same perspective as me, as it's just a transition from one state of awareness or perception than any other transition. But give me your take on it. Tell me what you think about it, Robert, because I know that for any listeners that haven't listened to a previous interview between the two of us, it's going to fascinate them and it's going to potentially heal a lot of people or help a lot of people.
Yeah, so in my second book, Your Soul's Gift, there's an entire chapter about the pre-birth planning of suicide. And the person who is the subject of that chapter is an American woman named Carolyn. And she lost her only child, a son named Cameron, to suicide. And it happened just a few days after he graduated from high school. He had severe depression and anxiety, and he hung himself from a rafter in their home. And she was the one who found him and had to cut the rope and bring the body down. And the timing of this was at a point in Cameron's life where he was just about to go off to college and in his mother's mind start doing wonderful, exciting things in the world. And then instead, there was the suicide. So she and I did a channeling session in which we spoke at length with Jesus about suicide in general and Cameron's suicide in particular. And Jesus comes in toward the beginning of the channeling session. And I asked him, is suicide planned by people before they're born? He says it is never planned as a certainty, but it is planned as a possibility, a probability, or rarely a probability so high as to be almost certain. And then he says that was the case with Cameron. Cameron was bringing back into body unhealed energies from past lives for the purpose of healing them. And he knew before he was born that he was doing this to such an extent that it would cause severe anxiety and severe depression and make a suicide highly likely, almost certain. Now, people might ask, why would anybody create a life plan like that? Well, certain souls are, we could use the term ambitious. They want to accomplish a lot in a single lifetime. And that was his intention. He wanted to heal all of these unhealed energies that had accumulated over a number of past lives. Now, we have to keep in mind here that if the personality doesn't fulfill the soul plan, the soul does not look at that as a kind of failure. There's no judgment at all. The soul will have a sense of incompletion and will want to complete the life plan in another incarnation. But that's all the soul feels about that. There's no judgment. There's no sense of failure at all. Then Jesus steps aside and Cameron comes in and he speaks at length about the new life he's created for himself on the other side. He tells his mother that he's working with teens who have suicided to have a gentle and easy transition back into the non-physical. And he tells his mother that she did not fail him in any way. She was in no way responsible for the suicide. It was wholly his decision. He says that they had many, many meetings in the dream state while she was asleep in which they talked about this. And he is working with her in the dream state to help her process her grief. Then he steps aside and Jesus comes back in. And we start talking about suicide in more general terms. And he shares a piece of information which I believe is perhaps the single most important piece of information and the most healing I've seen in all the years I've been researching pre-birth planning. He tells us, and this is a direct quote here, all suicides preventable by outside forces were indeed prevented. I'll say it again. All suicides preventable by outside forces were indeed prevented. And then he explains what he means by this, which is, he says that if the suicidal person has the slightest openness or willingness to change their mind, spirit knows that, and then spirit stages an intervention. The intervention could be almost anything. Somebody could walk by and smile, then they feel a little bit better and they don't go through with it. Or a bird flies by and distracts them and they don't go through with it. Sometimes the intervention is something much more dramatic. I actually know somebody who was seriously contemplating suicide, and a being that we later determined to be an angel assumed physical form, assumed human form, and told him, don't take your life. Go to this particular spiritual study center, which he did. And he met the woman who owns it, and things happened from there that ended up changing his life. But the point here being that if the suicidal person has any openness or willingness to change their mind, spirit knows and spirit stages an intervention. That in turn means, Jesus tells us, that if a suicide is completed, there was no openness or willingness to change their mind, and therefore there was literally nothing any other person could have done to prevent the suicide. So this to me is a life-changing revelation, because if you have lost somebody to suicide, there's very likely going to be at least some self-blame, thoughts about what could I have done to prevent this. Well, if the suicide was completed, there was literally nothing you could have done. So for any of your audience who has lost a loved one to suicide, I would invite you now, take any guilt or self-blame you may feel and set it down and step away from it. There was literally nothing you could have done.
Wow, that's amazing. We see that as well, Robert, in two of the podcasts that we've done previously. I was just mentioning before we came on that actually Dennis, who was in one of the episodes, had talked about how his son had transitioned by suicide and how he attempted to transition that way. And just a bit like what you're saying, he felt a hit to his chest, he fell back, and then just to make sure that he didn't do anything further, there was a knock on the door and it was his brother-in-law. And then that moment passed and he never went through with it. And he's very glad that he didn't. But he realizes that what you're saying there is true. But also I heard another transition that was just really amazing, and it was from Kathy McManus in her episode with her husband. And she said, her son kind of transitioned by suicide, and she felt drawn to go to this theatre, and she was sat in the theatre, Robert, and the girl behind her, suddenly she felt impelled to talk to her, and as she talked to this young lady, it turned out that this young lady had tried on 3 occasions to commit suicide and was contemplating it again. She realised that Spirit were giving her the moment that she'd never got to say to her son of what she would tell him if she tried to prevent him from transitioning, and to sort of share it with this young girl. And she realised that her son helped to sort of inspire the words that she spoke. And they had this kind of conversation that was almost multidimensional in a way, where she got the opportunity to say to her son in the form of this beautiful girl in front of her what she never got to say to him in life, to prevent this girl from committing suicide. But equally, this girl gave back a gift to her of sort of, realizing the purpose and the kind of power in her experience and how she'd healed and was able to heal others. Sometimes out of these awful situations come these beautiful paradoxes of kind of collateral beauty, if you will, of like helping and healing others through our own experience as well, which is kind of amazing, incredible. How do you feel in terms of people that transition from murder? Exactly the same, Robert.
I haven't yet researched murder. I would like to do that for my next book. My understanding is, and this comes from direct personal experiences, not just a conceptual understanding, that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love. So our true nature is to be unconditionally loving. Well, an unconditionally loving being would be very unlikely to plan before birth to commit a murder. So knowing that, I have to believe that the vast, vast majority of murders are free will decisions, fear-based, made by the personality after incarnating. It's possible that the potential that decision would be made was foreseen, but I don't think murder is planned as a high likelihood, except in very rare occasions. Now, there probably are rare occasions where somehow a murder serves the highest good in ways that are just beyond human comprehension. And in those occasions, rare though they would be, then it would make sense that an unconditionally loving being might agree to a plan like that. But I have to think that's a very small number of those instances.
I've got an instant for you. There was a really incredible, when I did the Catby London experience for my 50th birthday last year, we went on a Jack the Ripper tour. It sounds awfully gruesome, and it is, but it's an incredibly amazing experience. And the tour guide was absolutely fabulous. When you sometimes get these tour guides that have researched everything and they've just researched it from the perspective of what it would be like now. We had this kind of awe-inspiring moment where he gave this speech at the end of the walk or experience, if you will. He takes you through the life and what had happened and what was reported and all those kind of things. At the end, he said something really profound, Robert. He said, in the 6-month period that these crimes were committed, and they were really gruesome and awful in experience, the situations just suddenly stopped. But in the East End of London, where those experiences had been, there had been smog, there had been women that were so poor because they weren't allowed to work. There had a situation where poverty had been ignored in the area. There was no lighting, night lighting. And as a result of this period of disease, for want of a better word, or challenge, women started to fight for the vote, and they got the vote. The East End got lighting and electricity. Smog and pollution was started to put under control as people wanted to improve the air conditions to be able to see clearly at night so that they could be safer. So all these kind of incredible changes came out of this awful situation. And though you'd never want the awful situations to happen, again, this collateral beauty that comes out the other side is incredible change at fast speed, which may have never happened had those situations happened. There are these profound moments in life where I remember just sitting there and just thinking to this guy, wow, like I never even considered it or thought of it in that way. But that's kind of profound, isn't it?
Well, that's essentially the purpose served by all life challenges. They're intended to be catalysts. In some of the workshops I do, we do something called the Divine Virtues exercise. And I wish I could draw this out, but if you'll just visualize a graph with the horizontal axis is time, vertical axis is your level of consciousness. So in this graph, a typical life plan is that you're going up slowly, making incremental gains in consciousness. And then the life plan calls for this spike in your consciousness. And that point where it spikes up is a pre-planned inflection point. The inflection point is almost always some kind of life challenge. And the thinking from the pre-birth planning perspective is that the challenge, whatever it is, will provide both the opportunity and the motivation to raise your vibration and your level of consciousness. That's why it's a catalyst.
That's amazing. Incredible, Robert, incredible. In terms of life purpose, when people come to you and say, because I've had some very interesting sort of awarenesses as a result of your work, and not always what I anticipated. I remember in one of your workshops, you said to go back and look at the milestones of your life and sort of explore them and look and see if there were any patterns. And it never really occurred to me. You know, I work with children in the spirit world, and I help reconnect them in terms of awareness with that. Of course, they're never unconnected, but in terms of the physical consciousness awareness, and to kind of give the experience and awareness that they are still present in our current life and internally connected. But one of the things that you said when you look back, I was like, oh my gosh, even like things that were really seemed random at the time, like a summer job that I had taken at university of being a lifeguard, and then having been sort of inspired to end up in the lost children section, reconnecting children on beaches. And I realized, oh my gosh, I'm doing the same job in different guises throughout my life. And I was like, gosh, that's really weird. And suddenly you start to see these little soul plan moments that at the time felt really insignificant. It was just a summer job. It was just and then more recently, Robert, and we'll have to have a chat offline sometime about some of the experiences that have happened to me recently, but I've seen soul plans start to open up in front of me now, because I've become so aware of your teachings that suddenly I'm like, oh, I'm about to open up into this soul plan, and this is going to be my role. And sort of seeing things, it's really weird. It's almost like in a 3-dimensional way where I'm aware that I'm in the present, but I'm also aware of the circumstances that are kind of going to happen around me and the role that I've got to play in them. And I can see the challenge and why it's been placed in front of me, and I can recognize it on the energy line of the past life incarnation work that I've done, because I know about some of my past lives. I recognize the things that I've come to heal in this experience. So everything that you've said today, I can honestly say that the more that I've explored it and started to understand it, I've started to experience life in a different way and see things evolving as they happen, which is it is really incredible. It is really different, Robert. And I've gone from, at the beginning of this journey years ago, I didn't believe in soul planning at all. And then I've gone to, I completely 100% believe in it. I've got such evidence that it exists. I can't deny it. And through the work that I do, more and more I get nuggets and insights into different experiences, and I have that kind of wow moments. And I definitely think there's healing going over to timelines. I really see it frequently, and I find that incredibly powerful. I think we even sort of put hints around us of like the lives that we're healing as well, because now I know that I've got a past life in Egypt, and the past life is, even the subject matter that I studied there is the street name that I live on here. It's like, and so I realise there's little, I guess, signposts, that sort of show my soul that I am working through that awareness of that energy. And so that's kind of cool as well. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I just think your experience is amazing, and I'm very excited about your forthcoming books and the experiences that you're going to take in terms of duality, Robert. Is there anything else that you want to say to the viewers? Anything that you'd like to sort of share, or do you want to tell them about any of your work that's coming up that they could sign up to?
Well, we have a group online, Between Lives Soul Regression Workshop, coming up very soon. And we do these about every 3 to 4 months. If you sign up for the newsletter at yoursoulsplan.com, you'll be kept informed about that. I think the message I would just leave people with is to recognize that the fact that you're here in a body on planet Earth places you among the most courageous beings in the universe. It's my understanding that Earth is literally the most difficult planet on which to have an incarnation in our universe. And many, many beings know that they could learn a lot by coming here, but they choose not to. So that courage that it takes to come into a body on Earth, number one, courage to plan your challenges before you incarnate, but number two, even more courage to execute the pre-birth plan once you're here. There's an ascended master named Aaron who does a lot of the channeling in my books, and he says, quote, "You do not come into the incarnation for comfort or convenience." And that is putting it quite mildly. So you know that before you come here, that it's not going to be comfortable, it's not going to be convenient. It's going to be very, very challenging depending upon what you've planned in your pre-birth planning session. And if you have the courage to do that, that is something quite remarkable. So honor yourself and honor everybody else for having the extraordinary courage to be here.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for coming, Robert. It's a pleasure. I really appreciate you, and it's fantastic to see you.